Hi there, business owner. Do you want a better understanding of business finance, what your numbers actually mean, and stories of the highs and lows of business, where I'll be sharing my tips and tricks every week? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to the 3Bs podcast with Stephanie. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 3Bs podcast. Thank you for listening in today. As always, I'm your host Stephanie, and this week's episode is all about yesterday's Spring Budget 2024, which was announced by Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor of the Exchequer for the UK government. There'll be things in this podcast that will be relevant to you and may not be, but I'm going to cover the whole key takeaways from the over an hour long speech that happened. So pop your headphones in the next 15 minutes, you'll know the ins and outs, and hopefully some of it will resonate with you and you'll leave this episode a little bit more informed than when you joined. If you have any specific or tailored questions, do get in touch with your accountant or speak to us at ABCS UK. We'll be more than happy to help you. Enjoy the episode. If you follow us on Instagram at abcs.uk, you will have seen in my stories that I love the budget. I absolutely love the budget. If you're not following us, go over and give us a follow. That would be amazing. I'd really appreciate that. But I love the budget. I love sitting down and writing copious amounts of notes. But this one was over an hour long, which usually the Chancellor speaks for around 40 minutes, and then there's all the rest of the ceremony that goes on along with it. And yesterday's Spring Budget, there was no huge surprises. A lot of the things that were discussed on the budget were sort of leaked to the news beforehand. So nothing was a really big surprise to me, but there was a few things that were key takeaways that I think would be really important for you to know. So in the Spring Budget 2023, it was announced that inflation was at an all-time high at 10.7%, and they wanted to reduce it by more than 50% by the end of 2024. At the beginning of 2024, the latest figures from the OBR showed that inflation is at 4% and should be down to just 2% in 2 months' time. This should hopefully relieve some of the pressure many households and businesses are facing as the interest rates start to die down. So the good news is inflation's coming down, borrowing's coming down. We have the second lowest level of government borrowing and government debt in the whole of the G7. Our borrowing is lower than expected, which is great because as the inflation is coming down, we're not actually having to borrow more money, and the government as a country and as an economy and the government are not getting into any further debt. But the things that we always talk about when the budget comes around, especially in the last year or two, is the energy prices, the fuel duty and the alcohol duty. So the energy prices, the 1st of July 2023 was a drop in price that was announced, and that still stands. The good news with the Spring Budget 2023 is that people that are on a prepayment meter were brought in line to the same caps. They weren't paying more than those on direct debit. There was no further measures announced to help homeowners or businesses with cost of energy, but the rates are staying where they are. So hopefully that is helping to bring them back down to more manageable levels for business owners and homeowners alike. Fuel duty was another tariff which is often frozen or has been more recently. In the Spring Budget 2023, it was announced that there would be a 5p cut and that the fuel duty would be frozen. That was due to expire in August 2024, and that has been extended for a further 12 months. As well as the Great British Pub had a great announcement in Spring 2023 budget, which was quite a surprise when it came out, is that for every pint of draft ale, beer or cider from a pub, had an 11 pence duty deduction added to it. That was also due to end in August 2024, but the Chancellor has extended it until February 2025, which is great news for business owners that are in the hospitality industry and for the Great British Pub and for people who like to visit the Great British Pub. For those who are employed or those who are employers, the headlines were made before the announcement that Class 1 National Insurance contribution was due to come down again by another 2%. So from April the 6th, 2024, Class 1 National Insurance employee contributions will be down to 8%. That is a saving for an average employee of around £450 a year. Now, before people get too excited, This does ease some of the costs that employees face, but it's worth noting that the national minimum wage and the national living wage will also be increasing from April 2024, meaning that more employees will cross into that 20% income tax threshold when they go over their personal allowance. The standard personal allowance is frozen again at £12,570 per year. But if, as the national living wage for people aged 23 or over is increasing to £11.44, you're working less hours before you hit that income tax threshold. So don't get too excited. It's great that the national insurance has dropped, but don't get too far ahead of yourselves, because depending on your situation and your employee situation, if you're a business owner, they may not be more better off from April financially when it comes to their employment PAYE pay slips. What was also great was that Class 4 national insurance contributions was also given a 2% cut. So that's gone down from 8% to 6%, which is for self-employed individuals and will save an average individual around £350 per year. Again, it's from the new tax year, 6th of April 2024. The other news in business is that the VAT threshold had been frozen for 7 years. In previous years, that would be reviewed and amended each year, but it's been frozen for the last 7 years until the Chancellor announced yesterday that the VAT threshold will be increased from £85,000 to £90,000 per year. That's your turnover, so that's your sales. The threshold is when registration becomes mandatory. Obviously, you can voluntarily register for VAT and always speak to your accountant to see if VAT registration voluntarily is correct for you. It's usually more beneficial in B2B or business-to-business businesses, but it's best to get personalised advice for that. If you want to look at your VAT and where you are in relation to the VAT threshold, your average monthly income will now be £7,500. If it's that or more than that, then you will be over the threshold and need to register for VAT. One thing that most business owners forget when they're trying to calculate their VAT threshold, their turnover for that, is that it's done on a rolling 12-month basis. So it's not, if your tax year is April to March, it's not April to March and then it starts back again to 1. It would be April to March and then it would be May to April and then it would be June to May. And that rolling 12-month basis is what the threshold is calculated on. So do be aware of that if you're calculating your VAT threshold, your turnover, to work out how close you are to the threshold yourself. Another thing the Chancellor talked about was pensions. There is a reform of pension planned. There was no concrete plans announced, and I am very mindful of the fact that we are likely to have a general election in the not too distant future, so that pension reform would take a really long time to go through all the procedures it has to go through. So take it with a pinch of salt. A reform of pensions is planned, assuming we keep the current government we have if there is a general election, and that the new government don't choose to scrap that or change those ideas. The reform sounds quite interesting in that if you have pension pots from multiple employments, that you can pull them together, or when you change jobs, you can take it from one employment to another and keep putting into the same pot, which sounds great. But again, it was mentioned, but there's no concrete plans, and we will just need to wait and see on that one. Something that was quite a headline in the 2023 spring budget was childcare, and they announced that all working parents with children under 5 would be eligible to 30 hours free childcare. It's a staggered approach, but 3 and 4-year-olds already receive their 30 hours. The cost per child given to nurseries was confirmed back in the spring budget, but the childcare payments were confirmed in the 2024 spring budget yesterday, meaning nurseries can now start to finalise their plans for the April 2024 changes. A lot of the nurseries and childcare providers that we've worked with and we know in the industry have been reluctant to admit 2-year-olds for April 2024 onwards because they weren't aware of exactly how much they were going to get, how it would be paid to them, and they need to make sure that their businesses are running financially viably too. So as a reminder, from April 2024, all 2-year-olds with working parents will receive 15 free hours of childcare per week. From September 2024, all children from 9 months to 4 years will receive their 15 free hours. And then from September 2025, All children from 9 months to 4 years will get the full 30 hours free childcare, as the 3 and 4-year-olds already do. If you have a 2-year-old now, when they turn 3 or 4, they will automatically move up to the 30 hours free childcare. So that's also something to factor in when you're working out when you can work, how flexibly you can work, when you can get some child-free time to actually get some admin done, or however you run your business. If you're already paying childcare, it's just going to reduce some of those costs that you're already paying. So factor that into when you're working out your business and your household costing and budget for the next 6 months. The other thing was the child benefit high income charge, which you have probably heard me talk about on my soapbox multiple times. I think it's so unfair that 2 parents can earn £49,999 a year each and still receive full child benefit. Yet if one parent does not work and one parent earns £50,001 a year, they are liable to the child benefit high income charge. The government have finally listened to this, and they are looking at reforming this to a household income level rather than an individual level, which is exactly what it should be. But that's not going to come into place until April 2026. So what they've done right now to make immediate steps is to increase the income threshold to £60,000 per year. Now, I know from my own clients within ABCS UK that we have been looking at whether to make the businesses a limited company instead of sole trader. We've been basing all our calculations on that £50,000 a year threshold. So we will now go back to them because actually the goalposts have moved, and now both parents can earn £60,000 or one parent can earn £60,000 without being liable to pay the child benefit high income charge. So again, speak to your accountant if you're affected by this, or come and ask us. We're more than happy to go through your options with you and look at your position and see actually whether the decisions you made last year or the decisions you made 2 weeks ago may be different now that the rules have changed. And finally, 2 more points that I wanted just to point out to you is that the Chancellor announced a ISA system reform. So there will be a new British ISA, which will give you an extra £5,000 annual tax-free savings allowance each year. And there was also talks of a new British savings bond with an SNI, which I would need more information on before I could share that with you. And also non-dom status. You may have seen the headlines in the past. A non-domiciled person is a UK resident but not domiciled here for tax purposes. This is quite an outdated scheme, and there's been lots of calls for it to be revamped. This is going to be abolished completely, and they're going to look at a whole new, more modern regime where people who arrive here from April 2025 will not be taxed on their foreign income for 4 years, and after that they'll be taxed as they're a UK resident. There'll be more information on that new scheme, and it's something I'll probably cover in a later podcast episode, to be honest, because it's quite in-depth. But if you do have foreign income, it's definitely something to keep an eye on to see what is the most tax efficient way for you. So there is, in a nutshell, the Spring Budget 2024. I hope it was really helpful for you. If you do have any questions, do get in touch, and I'll see you next week for the next episode of the 3Bs podcast. And that brings us to the end of another week of the 3Bs podcast with Stephanie. Thank you so much for listening. I'd really appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, rate and review this podcast wherever you are listening to it, so that I can reach more business owners and help them build better businesses. See you next week for the next episode.